Everyone in the Valley of Ullin told a different version of the Ivory Salamander, yet every version began with an avalanche. The elders swore the avalanches were lured down the cliffs by whispered regrets, that snow listened the way a hound does and barreled after sorrow. When the tons of ice and rock roared toward the river, a pale creature, long as a man's arm, white as a funerary candle, slithered from some hidden vent in the bedrock. It exhaled a pearl-grey plume over the falling mass, and what had been ruin hardened in mid-plunge, freezing not into ice, but into veined marble. Looking closely, one could find road shapes in the stone, a child's kite, a splintered lute, the blurred suggestion of 2 fingers almost touching. The sculptures were never the hero's trophies or a tyrant's busts. They were the shards of memories that the avalanche had devoured. I spent my childhood staring at those shapes. The largest avalanche from my youth lay against the northern cliff like a halted waterfall, its marble folds streaked with quartz that caught dawnlight. My father, a quarryman, said the mountain kept its ledger there, every sin of forgetfulness we tried to bury. I didn't understand him until the Winter Mother began losing her own ledger. Dates misplaced, faces unstitched from names. Rooms entered with no recollection of the door. When spring came, she could still hum the lullaby etched on her bones, but she could no longer remember why it soothed me. Then, one morning, she slipped out of the house before breakfast and did not return. The search party found her shoes near the cliff trail. They also found fresh slide scars on the slope, the telltale hiss of settling snow, and a new rib of marble occluding the river. My father said the salamander had breathed too late this time, that the mountain had swallowed more than it sculpted. But the rescue captain declared nobody could have survived such a fall, and the marble ridge was sealed, just another monument to what the valley had lost. My father knelt beside it, pressing his ear to the stone, as though he might hear Mother's voice echo in the matrix. He came home with white dust on his beard and silence in his throat. Grief, like river silt, settles into every corner. I took over the household errands, managed ledger books for the quarry, and pretended the outer order proved an inner one. Each evening, however, I walked to the ridge and traced its ridges with gloved fingers. Sometimes I made out the curve of an eyelid or the twist of her braid. Sometimes the marble was only marble, refusing me. That limbo lasted 3 years, until the night I dreamed of the Ivory Salamander itself, ruby eyes, gilt neck fluttering, breath curling like smoke around a shape that tightened, clarified, and became my mother stepping out of stone. I awoke certain the legend hid more than consolation. It hid possibility. The next morning I announced my plan. I would ascend beyond the quarry into the upper cirques, where the salamander, if real, must emerge from springs veiled by steam and moonlit vapour. Father shook his head. "What would you do," he asked, "if you found it?" I showed him the bone-white scalpel I had borrowed from the sculptor, Tervica tool for paring stone. "Carve Mother free." He laughed, but his laughter was raw wood splitting. "You can't chisel memories out of marble," he said. Yet he handed me Mother's old almanac, a worn notebook filled with her field sketches of alpine herbs. On the inside cover she'd inked a compass rose, and beneath it a phrase in her looping hand. "The mountain always keeps an answer, but never the one you expect." Father pressed the book into my palms. "If you must go," he murmured, "take her words with you." I left at first snowmelt, following goat trails that crumbled under my boots. 2 days above the tree line, the wind peeled at my cheeks and turned waterskins to rattles. The cliffs sang with distant ice falls. On the 3rd dawn, I found a cave mouth crusted with hoarfrost that exhaled warm air smelling of lime. Inside, the walls were not rough granite but smooth as an eggshell, veined with pink mineral rings, and the floor bubbled with hot springs. Steam blurred everything except a lanky silhouette hunched over a tablet of stone. At least the pitch of her humming suggested a woman wore a cloak of salamander hides sewn edge to edge like ivory shingles. Her hair, A spill of silver threads reminded me so sharply of my mother's braid that I forgot speech. She did not startle, only looked up with steady copper eyes. "You've come to trade," she said, as though she'd expected me since the mountain was young. I explained who I was, what avalanche had taken, what dream had summoned me. She listened with neither pity nor skepticism, working a chisel along the edge of her tablet with strokes so precise the stone shed translucent curl. When I finished, she dipped the chisel tip into a pool where the shaving dissolved like sugar. "People bring me two things," she said, "yearnings and regrets. Which do you offer?" "Yearning," I answered too quickly. Regret was heavier, harder to haul up the pass. She smiled, and I felt seen in a way that left no room for pride. "And what will you pay?" she asked. I thought of the coin in my purse, the sacramental beads around my neck, even the scalpel in my pack, but none seemed coin enough for a myth. "Anything," I said finally. She pointed to the almanac. "Ink a map of the memory you want back." My hands trembled as I drew Mother in our kitchen, the copper kettle whistling, the smell of cloves, her fingers touching my brow to test fever. "There," I whispered, and the ink glistened like fresh sorrow. The woman took the page, folded it into a boat, and set it afloat on the spring. It charred at the edges, curled, then sank without a flame. "Payment received," she said. She took me to a back chamber, where stalactites hung like chandeliers. At the center stood the Ivory Salamander, coiled around a plinth of snow that hadn't melted in the thermal air. Its skin was not slick, but matte, the white of washed bone. When it breathed, the cave lights warped as if pulled through water. "It doesn't sculpt on command," the woman warned. "It answers an avalanche the way a poet answers silence, with whatever image honesty demands." I asked how I might bring an avalanche without taking more lives. She lifted her chisel. "By descending with me. The mountain is hungry. We will feed it." That evening we stood on a cornice above the valley. She tapped seams in the snowpack where stress lines flashed like lightning trapped in ice. She traced them with her chisel, whispering something that sounded like the valley's oldest lullaby. The snow began to shiver, then slump. I felt it inside my rib cage, ribs spacing apart. We skidded to safe ground as the slope gave way with a roar that drowned my pulse. At its heels came the salamander, sliding faster than water, eyes alight. It inhaled the avalanche's howls and breathed out a plume that bleached the tumbling mass until it glittered alabaster under the moon. When the dust settled, the avalanche was a frozen river of marble spires, each shaped as intricately as coral. The woman led me along its rim. "Your memory is somewhere inside," she said. "Find it, and she may return, as long as you do not name her aloud." I didn't ask why. The rule felt primordial. I searched all night. I found a wicker thimble, a strand of pearls knotted in the pattern my mother taught me, the outline of two hands kneading dough. I found more than memory. I found the valley's collective ache embalmed, but no figure wearing my mother's features appeared. Just before dawn, despair weighed so thick my knees pressed indentations in the marble drift, and I realized there was a shape beneath my own shadow. A faint impression of a woman kneeling across from me. Her head was bowed, arms wrapped around empty air, as if she cradled a bundle no longer there. I brushed snow from the form, but instead of clearing, it softened like clay, and warmth pulsed beneath the surface. Fingers, eyelids, the curve of lips emerged, filling in with flesh the color of dawn's first blush. Mother blinked. Her eyes did not widen in fear. They mirrored mine, as though she'd expected me since the mountain rose. I almost spoke her name. She pressed two fingers to my mouth and shook her head. Voice, apparently, could reforge chains the mountain had just broken. We descended at sunrise in silence, Mother's hand folded around mine. When the valley folk saw us, all rippled outward faster than gossip. They accepted her return with the same pragmatism they granted snowfall. Some events needed no treaty with Sen. Father reached us last. He collapsed to his knees, touched Mother's feet, then her face, then both his palms to his chest as though confirming his own solidity. Tears kept him mute. She answered with a smile that carried the hush of snowfields. The woman in salamander hides arrived 3 days later. She came not to claim payment, I'd already offered my map, but to remind me that all bargains have echoes. Someone else's grief is seeking shape, she said, and marble alone cannot hold it. She requested a new kind of trade. I would apprentice under her, learning the chisel language that maps tension inside a slope so the valley's future avalanches might sculpt safely. My mother just returned, I protested. I can't leave her again? The woman traced a sigil on the well's frost rim. It resembled a knot, but also a road splitting into two. Leaving is sometimes another word for keeping, she murmured. That night, Mother sat beside my bed, combing my hair like she had when fever gripped me as a child. She's right, Mother said before I could even pose the dilemma. Her voice carried a faint cavern echo, as though part of her still belonged underground. The mountain took years of my life, maybe more. It gave them back because you asked in the only tongue it hears, that of risk. Don't let the conversation end here. So I followed the woman after the first thaw. We mapped snow. We memorized ridge lines the way harpists memorize arpeggios. She taught me to read the creases of glaciers, where pressure built like unsung verses, how a striation 3 breaths wide predicted fracture. How wind could scour one side of a cornice until it mirrored a blade, ready to slice loose at the weight of a single crow. Each lesson ended where we began, in the salamander's cave, depositing regrets or yearnings written on paper boats that dissolved in mineral pools. At midsummer, the salamander shed its skin. The translucent husk resembled a cathedral's window, thinner than rice paper yet etched with veins that glowed faintly blue. The woman gifted me a fragment. For your father, she said. It will remind him not all stone is prison. I carried the shard down valley and placed it on our kitchen sill, where dawn lit it to a milky flame. Father touched it often, and when it warmed beneath his fingers, he would hum the lullaby that still lived where words struggled. Years passed. I returned between expeditions, each time finding Mother a little more present, more tethered to the living moment. She took up stone carving herself, coaxing delicate herbs from the quarry's cast-offs. She said marble remembered pressure the way skin remembers touch. And her sculptures grew so lifelike, bees attempted to land on the blossoms. But memory, like snowpack, cannot accumulate without risk. One winter, the largest storm in half a century smothered the range. The snow measured taller than doorways, roofs bowed, and wolves prowled into sheep pens out of confusion. The Valley Council begged my mentor and me to assess the slopes. When we reached the ridge, we found tension lines spidering across every face. An avalanche was certain, colossal enough to drown half the valley. We could not redirect it. Only the salamander's breath might transmute it before it reached homes. We summoned the creature with the old song, verse of longing, chorus of resignation. The salamander appeared but moved sluggishly, its skin dim. In the caves we discovered why the springs had cooled, their vents clogged by permafrost. Without heat, the creature could not accrue the energy required for its alchemy. We had hours, maybe less. The woman removed her cloak, spread it on a boulder, and began arranging runes of quartz around it, a fire lattice. I will keep the breath warm, she said. You must bring the salamander to the avalanche's path and guide its exhale. Alone, I protested. She silenced me. Remember your map, she said, invoking the first payment I'd ever offered. Every trade circles back. Then she knelt inside the lattice and began chanting, siphoning her own body heat into the stones. I felt the air shimmer. The salamander stirred, eyes brightening as though fed by the current she produced. I coaxed it onto a sled fashioned from larch boards, and together we raced down drainage chutes, sparks from the salamander's claws igniting blue trails. in the night snow. The avalanche broke before we arrived, an ocean of white swallowing black firs whole. I steered the sled to parallel its flank, shouted the command I had practiced 100 times. "Breathe!" The salamander inhaled so sharply my ears popped. When it exhaled, the breath unfurled like silk, sleeping across the leading edge of the avalanche. Snow whitened to supernal luminescence, slowed, then froze, mid-curl, mid-crash. The front of the avalanche became a colonnade, arches upon arches. Inside them, shapes coalesced. A shepherd's first lost lamb, a sailor's final glimpse of shore, a teenager's unopened letter. Memory after memory bled into marble, and the remaining snow, robbed of momentum, sifted harmlessly to the valley floor. Homes survived. Fires for celebration kindled immediately. I hurried back to the cave. The quartz lattice was dark, its stones burst from within by cold. The cloak lay empty. My mental had traded herself, body and warmth, to keep the salamander's breath alive. In the center of the circle stood a new marble pillar no taller than a flute case, carved with her likeness. Bent over a tablet, eyes intent, chisel poised. I carried the pillar to my parents. Father wept openly for the first time since Mother's disappearance.
"Can I, George?
Mother set the pillar on the mantel next to her herb carvings. She told me the mountain had claimed the woman's memory, not as punishment, but as proof that stewardship demands more than observation. It demands offering the self as bridge. Years later, when people ask why I still guide the salamander, why I lead crews to quarry marble only where the mountain permits, why I refuse to carve stone for monuments of vanity, I tell them about the ledger. Avalanches will keep falling because regrets will keep accumulating, but each breath of the ivory salamander can turn ruin into remembrance. We who know this must balance the scale, lighten regrets, deepen yearnings, and carve the memories worth keeping into everyday acts. Sometimes, at dusk, I ascend to the first marble ridge that took Mother. I bring no tools, only listening, and slips through the stone hollows and produces a tune uncannily like my mother's lullaby, threaded with a counter-melody that reminds me of my mentor's hum. I wait until the two lines braid, then I breathe in unison. In that breath lives all the distance between what is lost and what can be found, and the space is as thin and luminous as shed ivory skin.